In this video, I will talk about the Single Party Compensation Agreement, C.A.R Form SP, and the Commission Agreement, and in general, how to bill clients and how to use these forms. So if we break billing a client down to its simplest form, I would actually refer you to an RPA. And this is page 3 of 16 on an RPA. And there are these lines here where you can check a box when you're writing an offer that one of the parties will pay a commission to your brokerage, or you can write it in other terms, or you can write it anywhere on any document incorporated in an offer. And if this doesn't work, you can always just write an invoice on a letterhead. I can't tell you how many times I've used a purchase agreement or just an invoice typed out on a letterhead, signed by the client and delivered to escrow. But we're going to look at these documents today. So I have used the commission agreement many times, and I've used the single party compensation or agreement less. I see agents in my office that submit it, so I see them used on files. But I never really compared the two very closely until I printed them out or did a PDF of these to do this tutorial. Now I will say that these are used in an instance where you haven't already billed your client with another document. Now, the listing agreement invoices your client, your seller, when you're the listing agent. This form, and we'll start with the single party compensation agreement, this can be used if you want to invoice a seller that you don't have a listing agreement with. And I'd say that the situation that comes to mind where this form is used is when you may know of a seller that's interested in selling, but not on the market. And so what you can do is fill this form out, and I'll show you how, and bring a buyer and have an arrangement with the seller that the seller will pay you a commission should you bring a buyer. So let's take a look at this form real quick. We put the date that we prepare the form up here, the name of the principal. Now, I put seller, Sammy seller, just to indicate that the principal would be a seller because that's the most common use case. Now, these forms, there's some verbiage that I think is actually, first off, these forms should be combined into one form. This totally needs an overhaul. These two forms don't need to be separate and independent. And like many C.A.R forms, they overlap. A lot of forms overlap in their purpose. But we're going to put the name of the broker here. So now we have the principal and the broker, and their relationship is going to be predicated upon the sale of a property written out here. And so this might be the seller's property. And then what you're saying is the principal agrees to pay the broker, irrespective of agency relationships, I put percentage. It could be a flat fee dollar amount. And then it makes it subject to something. It makes it subject to the principal accepting an agreement with, and I put Bobby buyer, just so we understand that other party is the buyer. Now, I don't see anywhere in this form where those roles can't be reversed, but it's a little weird because this form is basically written that you're asking the seller to pay a commission should you present an offer, an acceptable offer from a buyer that you know. So you're basically billing on putting together an off-market transaction. That's really what's happening here, whether it's the form's intention or not. And then it gives a time frame for this to happen. Now it starts here and then it ends here. Now, shame on me, I didn't put a finishing date. And if you don't put an expiration date, then this form is voidable. This can be nullified by a party. So this is a very important detail. It's kind of good that I'm bringing it up because I didn't put it in my little sample that I just typed up. But same with the listing agreement. Always make sure you have a start and finish date, or else the form can be unenforceable. And then it basically just says that a definition for other party, and that the principal is obligated to pay the compensation. Now and it's binding, of course. And that's it. I mean, that's the meat of it. But let's see what else is going on here. Now, they have this whole thing on the MLS. which I think is unnecessary, except there's this one thing here, authority to enter an MLS after close of escrow. And this is getting the seller or principal's authorization to enter their property as a comparable. And likely you can get the publicity that comes with it as being an agent, and an agent that closed that transaction. So it continues on with the property address. Now, I might add, let's say there's more than one property, you can do an addendum that has more text. I can just see different ways this form can be improved. But now, this is another important area, and I didn't check a box here, but one should be checked. And this is where it indicates who you're representing. Are you representing the principal, which is almost always going to be the seller? Could be the buyer, but not in this scenario. Dual agent, or the other party, which is Bobby Buyer from up above. So you have to indicate who you're representing. And then there's some statutory advisories and disclosures and a mediation clause, which is good. It protects everyone. And that's pretty much it. If there's an entity, meaning that someone on here is not an individual, but a LLC or corporation, you check this box and put it in here. And then the principal is going to sign, and then the broker is going to sign. So that's really it for this form. Now, I never used this form personally. I mean, it's used in my office, but I always used a commission agreement because it was shorter and easier. But after reviewing both of them closely, I think in the future, I'll probably only use a single party compensation. Now, there's a little more leeway here because it says principal, seller, buyer, landlord, tenant, optionor, optionee. So basically they're saying, hey, you can bill anyone with this form. Any sort of person, any role you can imagine can be the principal. Now, again, I'll put the seller on here because it'll often be a seller. Now, you could put a buyer here too, but what's the other form that you'd typically use when you're going to bill a buyer a commission? The buyer representation agreement. That's the form you should be using. So let's say you don't want to have a buyer representation agreement because it's just kind of a one-off single transaction that this could be happening on. Well, you can use this form. You can use this form. And I want to make a point too, actually, before I forget. So sometimes I get calls from agents and they're working on a single party compensation and they say, hey, I want to withhold the name of the buyer, or for whatever reason, they want to mask the name of the address. Maybe the buyer's the principal and the other party is a seller, and they're using this form instead of a buyer representation agreement. Because here's the thing, there's so much fluidity with these forms. So in that case, if you need to mask a party, or you need to mask the street address, you have to be careful about creating an unenforceable document. So what you should do is instead just put something here, like here's what I would write. I'd write where it says property, and I'm masking it, I'd say something to follow upon execution on Exhibit 1 or Exhibit A. And that way you're stipulating that it's going to follow right after execution or something like that. Again, that's still kind of gray area, but I'm just telling you, agents call me and say, hey, I want to present someone, but I don't want let's say that it's just like this, but we don't want Sammy Seller to call Bobby Buyer, because in theory, if there's no listing agreement, Sammy Seller could say, let me look at the document. Oh, I know Bobby Buyer. Bobby Buyer is a friend of a friend. So they call up Bobby Buyer and say, hey, why don't you just make an offer without that agent? And we'll just save a commission. So agents will want to mask this. So you could say the exact same thing. You could say buyer identity to be revealed immediately following execution on Exhibit A. And then you have Exhibit A with the buyer's name. And once this is signed, you then send Exhibit A. Now this can be used with the commission agreement as well. You can mask whatever you want here. The single party compensation is more thorough. I like that form better for that reason. This is too vague. And so let's go through this very quickly. You have a principal, you have a broker. How much is the broker billing the principal? Well, you put that number right here. What's a transaction? All right, you put the transaction address here. Compensation is payable if principal accepts an offer. This verbiage is problematic. It really should be if principal enters into an agreement, because this right here is implying that the principal is a seller. Just saying, okay? So they say up here, the principal can be anyone you can even dream of, but down here they say if the principal accepts. Just weird. It's weird verbiage. This needs to be cleaned up. It won't be. This form's old, but I'm just saying that in a perfect world. All right. And then it puts an expiration date on when this can expire. So it won't last forever. Now, if you're smart, you'll put a very distant date because you don't want to expire. The whole point with these forms is you don't want to be circumvented as an agent. So when you fill this out, you need to think about how much time you need and what information you need to mask or withhold until this is signed so that you don't get cut out of a deal, because that happens all the time in this industry. It does. People, that happens all the time. I'll just say that. Okay. We have the same MLS thing, which somewhat unnecessary, but whatever. It's harmless. Party's initial, a little mediation clause. And this form, you can see right here, and other terms and conditions, write in whatever you want here. Just think, at its core, a form can be done on a dinner napkin. But then there's more questions. Well, what if someone doesn't perform? Well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And that's what creates these. It's all these questions. So we start with just the simple terms, and they get more and more complex. But we must always remember to try to go toward simplicity whenever possible. That's why I've always used this form, because it's been shorter than the single party compensation. But now looking at both of them, I actually like that this is a little bit technically more descriptive than the commission agreement. But I would take it on a case-by-case scenario depending on who the principal is. Is it a buyer? Is it a seller? And then we have the entity section. So C.A.R just recently added a bunch of entity sections where basically if the buyer or seller or principal or other party or whatever you want to call it is an entity, you check a box and you can put in the name of the entity and authorized signature. So if the let's say the principal is ABC Incorporated, well, that's not what goes signed, and you don't initial ABC Incorporated. You would go down, and Sammy Seller is actually the CEO of that company. And so you'd put Sammy Seller right there because he's authorized. You'll see Sammy Seller's signature wherever the seller is signing. That's the point of these entity things. All right, so principal signs, broker signs, and that's it. If you have any questions, love to hear them. Please leave a comment. Thank you for watching.